The antiseptic smell is what I remember first. A sharp, sterile lemon fighting a losing battle against the low tide of human sickness. It clung to the stiff visitor's chair, the thin blanket, and the very air Liam breathed. Red wine smeared across 12 yards of hand-stitched French lace would have been less of a violation than this place. Liam's hand felt cool in mine, the skin papery. His breath hitched in a rhythm dictated by a quietly beeping machine, a metronome counting down the moments until this ordeal was over. Or until it wasn't. Visiting hours are nearly done, a voice said, crisp as a newly starched uniform. I looked up. Nurse Corcoran stood in the doorway, a clipboard held like a shield against her chest. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. It was a thin, practiced curve, a weaponized pleasantry. She wasn't looking at me, but at the worn elbows of my wool coat, draped over the back of the chair. She was appraising, cataloging, and dismissing me in a single glance. I'm not a visitor, I said, my voice quiet. I'm his wife. Of course, she said, the words dripping with honeyed condescension. Her gaze flickered to Liam, sleeping fitfully. We have so many passing through. It's hard to keep track of the unremarkable ones. A small, sharp thing pricked my sternum. I didn't react. I had spent years as a senior conservator at the Imperial Archives, learning that the first sign of damage is often invisible to the naked eye. You learn to feel for the subtle fraying, the change in texture, the weakness under the surface. I felt it now. In her voice, in the set of her shoulders, in the institutional arrogance that permeated this place like the smell of bleach. Liam stirred, his eyes fluttering open. He gave her a weak, apologetic smile, the kind he always gave when he felt he was being an inconvenience. He was a landscape architect, a man who coaxed beauty from dirt and stone. He preferred muddy boots to polished shoes and saw inherent value in things others overlooked. It was what I loved most about him, and what people like Nurse Corcoran could never comprehend. Sorry, he murmured. Didn't mean to be a bother. Not at all, she chirped, her tone suggesting the exact opposite. We just need to keep things tidy. Doctor's orders, she adjusted his foredrip with a sharp, efficient movement that was just rough enough to be a statement. You'll need to leave soon, ma'am. Patients need their rest. Standard protocol. I squeezed Liam's hand. Standard protocol. The phrase hung in the air, a neat label for 1,000 tiny cruelties. I was a professional observer of decay, and I knew it when I saw it. It wasn't just in the crumbling bindings of ancient books or the fading pigments of a forgotten tapestry. It was here, in this room, in the slow, methodical erosion of a good man's dignity. I watched her walk away, her rubber-soled shoes squeaking a rhythm of self-importance on the polished linoleum, and I felt the first thread pull taut. The damage was beginning. I just didn't know how deep it would run. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in institutional contempt. Nurse Corcoran was the lead artist, and Liam and I were her unwilling canvas. It began with small things. A request for an extra pillow met with a sigh and a note scribbled on her chart, as if logging a frivolous complaint. The water pitcher left just out of Liam's reach. His lunch tray, delivered cold, with the curt explanation that the kitchen was backed up with priority cases. Each act was small enough to be deniable, a tiny splinter you could dismiss as an overreaction. But the splinters were accumulating, lodging themselves under my skin. How utilitarian, she commented one afternoon, gesturing to the simple, hand-knitted blanket I had spread over Liam's legs. It was a deep forest green, the color of the moss in the ancient woods behind our cottage. I had made it myself, the winter before we were married. It's warm, I said, my voice flat. I'm sure it is, she replied, her smile a slash of bright, false lipstick. So very practical, she ran a hand over the hospital issue sheet, a thin, bleached white thing that felt like paper. We, of course, prefer materials that can be properly sanitized. The implication was clear. My love, my care, was a contaminant. Liam, ever the peacemaker, tried to defuse the tension. Alara's a textile expert, he said, his voice raspy. She knows her wools. Nurse Corcoran's eyes widened in mock surprise. Oh, how fascinating. A hobbyist. It's so important to have a little something to keep one busy, isn't it? She did not look at me. She addressed the room, the machines, the ceiling. Anyone but the woman whose presence was an affront to her sense of order. Later that night, Liam's pain flared. a deep, gnawing ache in his chest that the scheduled dose of medication wasn't touching. He was stoic, his jaw tight, his knuckles white where he gripped the bed rail. I pressed the call button. Once. Twice. After 5 minutes, I pressed it again, holding it down for a full 10 seconds. The light above our door glowed, a useless red eye in the dim hallway. I stood in the doorway, watching the nurse's station. I could see her. She was leaning against the counter, laughing with an orderly. She glanced toward our room, saw me standing there, and deliberately turned her back, picking up a magazine. The casualness of it was breathtaking. It wasn't that she was busy. It was that we were not important enough to interrupt her leisure. A cold clarity settled over me. This wasn't about protocol or being busy. This was a demonstration of power. She was showing me my place. She was showing me that in her world, we were nothing. My husband's pain was a tool she could use to prove her point. I walked back to Liam's side, my steps silent. My fury was a physical thing, a block of ice forming in my chest. I started making notes, not in a diary, but on the back of a hospital brochure, using the precise, clinical language of an archival report. 10:47 p.m., call button pressed. 10:52 p.m., call button pressed again. 10:53 p.m., visual confirmation of Nurse Corcoran at station, engaged in non-work-related activity. I documented it all, my handwriting small and neat. An archivist's habit. You don't fight decay with emotion. You fight it with documentation. The cruelty escalated. The next morning, a junior doctor, young and nervous, came to review Liam's chart. He seemed concerned by one of the readings on the monitor. His oxygen saturation is a little lower than I'd like, he murmured, more to himself than to us. I'll mention it to Nurse Corcoran. We should probably increase the flow. He left. An hour passed. 2. The number on the pulse oximeter remained stubbornly low. Liam's breathing grew shallower, a faint wheeze accompanying each exhalation. I found Nurse Corcoran at the medication cart, meticulously counting pills into little paper cups. "Excuse me," I said. Dr. Evans was concerned about my husband's oxygen levels. He said the flow should be increased. She didn't look up. The doctor makes recommendations. I administer care based on the patient's overall chart and established priorities. She snapped a plastic lid onto a cup. There are patients on this floor in critical condition. We triage accordingly. His saturation is at 89%, I said, the number a hard, cold fact. And we are monitoring it, she replied, her voice still infuriatingly calm. She finally turned to face me, her eyes empty of anything resembling empathy. Believe me, if it becomes a true emergency, we'll know. Her use of the word true was a tiny, vicious jab. It implied that this, our fear, my husband's struggle for breath, was a performance, a fabrication. The ice in my chest expanded, a painful pressure against my ribs. I was a student of history, of empires that crumbled not from great battles, but from 1,000 small cuts, from the rot that starts within. I was watching it happen in real time. The system was rotting, and Nurse Corcoran was the smiling face of its decay. I went back to the room and sat down. I didn't argue further. There was no point. You cannot reason with a person who does not see you as a person. Instead, I watched the numbers on the monitor. I watched the slight blue tinge appear on Liam's nail beds. And I continued to take my silent, meticulous notes. I was no longer just a wife, sitting vigil. I was a witness, collecting evidence. I was waiting, not for her to show mercy, but for her to make her final, fatal mistake. The arrogance of people like her was their greatest vulnerability. They overplay their hand precisely because they cannot imagine losing. She believed she held all the cards. She had no idea I was playing an entirely different game. That evening, Liam seemed to rally. A small reprieve. The color returned to his face, and he was able to eat a little of the broth I cajoled a friendly cafeteria worker into giving me. He saw the tension in my shoulders, the hard set of my jaw. "Elle," he said, his voice still weak but clear. "Let it go." I looked at him, my careful composure threatening to crack. "Let it go? Liam, she's deliberately neglecting you. She left you in pain for 20 minutes last night." "She's busy," he insisted, the familiar excuse. He hated conflict more than anything. He built gardens, for God's sake. He created peace for a living. This is a big, city hospital. We're just two people. Don't make waves. It'll only make it worse. It can't get much worse, I said, my voice lower than a whisper. Yes, it can, he said, his earnestness heartbreaking. We'll be out of here in a few days. We'll go home, and this will all just be a bad memory. Please, Elara. For me. Just be nice. I felt something inside me break. It wasn't his fault. He was sick and scared, and his primary instinct was to shrink, to become smaller, to avoid drawing the predator's attention. He thought peace was the goal. He didn't understand that what she wanted wasn't peace. It was surrender. And then I saw her. Nurse Corcoran. She was standing in the hallway, just past the doorframe, ostensibly checking another patient's chart. But she was angled toward us, and a small, satisfied smirk played on her lips. She had heard him. She had heard my husband telling me to stand down. She had won. She gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of smug acknowledgement, before turning and walking away. The dissociation was immediate. It was a defense mechanism I'd learned long ago, a cool, quiet room in my mind where I could retreat when the world became too much. The sounds of the hospital faded to a dull hum. The scratchy wool of my coat against my skin became a distant fact. My grief, my rage, they were encased in glass, observable but not felt. I saw my hand reach out and smooth Liam's blanket. I heard my voice, calm and even, tell him to get some rest. But I was not there. I was somewhere else, watching a scene unfold from a great height. The breaking point came just after 3 a.m. I must have dozed off in the chair, because I was jolted awake by a terrible sound, a ragged, wet gasp. Liam was sitting bolt upright, his eyes wide with panic. He was clutching his chest, his face a ghastly shade of gray. The monitor was screaming, a frantic, high-pitched alarm that cut through the silence of the night. His oxygen saturation had plummeted into the 70s. I slammed the call button, my thumb pressing down so hard the plastic creaked. I yelled his name, my voice raw. Liam, stay with me. The alarm shrieked. Seconds stretched into an eternity. No one came. I hit the button again and again, a desperate, frantic tattoo. I could hear movement at the nurse's station now, voices murmuring. But still, the door to our room remained closed. Finally, it swung open. Nurse Corcoran stood there, not with a crash cart or an oxygen mask, but with a look of profound irritation on her face. The alarm was still blaring, a soundtrack to the worst moment of my life. "What is all this fuss?" she demanded, her voice sharp. She glanced at the monitor, then at Liam, who was struggling, drowning in the air. She didn't move toward him. She sighed, a long, put-upon sound. "He's just having a panic attack. Some people aren't built for this kind of stress." My blood ran cold. The quiet room in my mind dissolved, and all the fury I had suppressed came rushing back, not as heat, but as glacial ice. I stared at her. "He can't breathe." She waved a dismissive hand. "He's working himself up." "Honestly," she said, looking from my husband's terrified face to mine, "what is the point of all this? We have genuinely sick people to worry about. The resources could be better used." Then she delivered the final, killing blow, the words that would echo in the chambers of my memory forever. "He's a nobody, after all." Silence. The blaring alarm seemed to fade away. The world narrowed to the space between me and this woman. A nobody. She had taken my love, my life, the architect of my quietest joys, and dismissed him as a line item, an inefficient use of resources. The game was over. She had not just overplayed her hand. She had set the entire deck on fire. I said nothing. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply looked at her, and for the first time, she seemed to register something in my expression that she hadn't seen before. The pleasant, slightly worn wife was gone. In her place was something she did not have a category for. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. I turned away from her, my movements deliberate, almost unnaturally calm. I walked to Liam's side. He was still fighting for breath, his gaze locked on mine, full of terror. I leaned down and pushed the damp hair from his forehead. "It's all right," I whispered, my voice a strange, flat thing. "I'm fixing it now. Everything will be all right." Then, I straightened up and walked out of the room. I walked right past Nurse Corcoran as if she were a piece of furniture. I didn't spare her a glance. Her presence had been erased from my world. My steps were even and unhurried as I walked down the deserted corridor, the sound of the alarm growing fainter behind me. I found an empty family waiting room at the far end of the hall, the air stale with old coffee and grief. I reached into my practical, worn handbag and pulled out a phone. It wasn't a sleek, modern smartphone. It was an old, heavy satellite phone, a model that had been obsolete for a decade but was valued for one thing: its unbreakable, encrypted signal. There was only one number programmed into it. I pressed the button. It rang once. A voice answered, crisp and familiar, with no preamble. Yes, Alistair. It's me. My own voice was unrecognizable, stripped of all warmth, all emotion. It was a tool for conveying information. I'm at St. Jude's General. Room 304. I paused, took a steadying breath. It's Liam. His designated status is compromised. The situation is critical. There was a moment of silence on the other end, the kind of silence that denotes the processing of catastrophic information. I understand, Alistair said, his voice now laced with a cold fury of its own. What are your orders, Your Highness? The title felt foreign, a costume I hadn't worn in years. But it was a tool, and I would use it. Execute Protocol Spiro, I said. The words tasted like ash and iron. Full expression, no half measures. The local authority here is inadequate. Understood, Alistair replied. The line went dead. I stood there for a moment in the silent waiting room, the heavy phone cool against my palm. Protocol Spiro. The Hope Protocol. It had only ever been a theoretical exercise, a contingency for a scenario so dire it was almost unthinkable. It was designed for a state collapse, a direct threat to the line of succession. I had just deployed it for a single nurse in a single hospital, and I felt nothing but a vast, cold calm. I placed the phone back in my bag, smoothed the front of my simple dress, and walked back toward room 304. The game had changed. The board was about to be cleared. When I returned to the room, Nurse Corcoran was standing by Liam's bed, her arms crossed. An orderly was with her, fumbling with the oxygen tubing. The alarm had been silenced, but the number on the monitor was still terrifyingly low. She looked up as I entered, a triumphant sneer on her face. See, she said, all that drama for nothing. He's fine. I've increased his oxygen. Just like you wanted. She said it as if she were granting a favor to a difficult child. She thought she had won. She thought she had put me, the hysterical wife, back in my box. I didn't answer. I just walked to the far side of the bed, took Liam's hand, and waited. It started subtly. A low, rhythmic thrumming from far away. A sound that didn't belong in the city at night. It grew louder, resolving itself into the unmistakable beat of helicopter rotors. Not one, but several. Nurse Corcoran frowned, glancing toward the window. What in the world is that racket? Then came a new sound, from the hallway. Not the squeak of shoes or the rumble of a gurney. It was the sound of heavy, synchronized footsteps. Dozens of them. The sound of disciplined, marching men. It echoed on the linoleum, a percussive, invasive beat that spoke of absolute authority. The door to the room, which I had left ajar, was pushed fully open. Two men stood there, framing the entrance. They were dressed in immaculate, dark gray uniforms with high collars and silver piping. They wore no insignia I recognized from any local force. Their faces were impassive, their posture rigid. They didn't enter. They simply took up positions, their presence transforming the doorway into a guarded border. Nurse Corcoran stared at them, her mouth slightly agape. "Can I help you?" she demanded, her professional authority reasserting itself, though her voice wavered. "This is a restricted area." The men didn't even look at her. Their gaze was fixed on something over her head. The hallway behind them filled with more figures in the same uniform. They moved with a terrifying, silent efficiency, fanning out, securing the corridor. Hospital staff, drawn by the noise, froze in their tracks, their faces a mixture of confusion and fear. A security guard started to approach, then stopped, visibly shrinking back from the sheer, disciplined menace of the silent soldiers. The chief of staff, a harried-looking man named Dr. Albright, came running down the hall, his white coat flapping. "What is the meaning of this? Who are you people? I am the head of this hospital, and I demand you." His words were cut off as a new figure appeared. The soldiers parted to let him through. It was Alistair. He was in a perfectly tailored dark suit, his silver hair gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. He was flanked by two more guards, taller and more imposing than the others. He moved with an unhurried grace that made Dr. Albright's panicked energy seem clownish. Alistair's eyes scanned the room, bypassing the nurse, bypassing the doctor, and landing on me. He stopped 3 feet from the bed and gave a short, formal bow from the neck. "Your Highness," he said, his voice clear and carrying in the stunned silence. "Forgive the delay." The airspace took a moment to clear. The world stopped. Nurse Corcoran's face was a study in collapse. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving behind a waxy, mottled pallor. Her smug, condescending smile dissolved, her lips going slack. The clipboard she was holding slipped from her nerveless fingers and clattered to the floor, the sound unnaturally loud. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, darted from Alistair, to the guards, and finally, to me. Comprehension dawned, not like a sunrise, but like a building imploding. "Your Highness?" she whispered, the words a puff of disbelieving air. Alistair finally deigned to look at her. His gaze was not angry. It was far worse. It was the look one might give an insect that had found its way indoors. Utterly dismissive. He turned his attention to the terrified Dr. Albright. "This wing is now under the sovereign authority of the Eldorian crown," Alistair stated, his voice ringing with absolute power. "A medical transport team is 2 minutes out. They will be moving the Prince Consort. You will give them your full and unconditional cooperation. Is that understood?" Dr. Albright could only nod, his jaw working silently. "But he's," Nurse Corcoran stammered, pointing a trembling finger at Liam. The programming was too deep. The disbelief too strong. "He's a nobody." The silence that followed was profound. Every person in the hallway strained to hear. I looked at her. I finally spoke, my voice quiet, yet it cut through the silence like a shard of glass. "He is His Royal Highness, Prince Consort Liam of Eldoria," I said, letting each word land with the weight of a hammer blow. "My husband." I took a step toward her, my gaze holding hers. I saw raw, primal fear in her eyes now. The predator had become the prey, and you denied him care. You left him in pain. You called him unremarkable. I let the word hang in the air, her own insult repurposed into a weapon. "You told me his condition was being monitored according to standard protocol." My voice dropped, becoming colder still. "Now, you will see what our standard protocol looks like." A new team swept into the room. They weren't hospital staff. They were military medics, their movements swift, precise, and imbued with an authority that dwarfed anyone else's. They surrounded Liam's bed, their voices low and respectful as they checked his vitals, replaced the flimsy hospital floor with their own equipment, and fitted a high-flow oxygen mask over his face. One of them, a woman with a colonel's insignia on her collar, bowed her head to me. "Princess Alara, we have him."